Check, check, check. All right, folks, we're going to get started in about 1 minute. Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, April 23rd Community Services Committee. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that Ottawa is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. We do have regrets from Councillors DeRoche, Hill, and Troster, and I'll ask the committee coordinator to do the roll.
Councillor Brown. Here. Councillor Carr.
Here.
Councillor DeRoche. Councillor Hill. Councillor Kavanagh.
Present.
Councillor King.
Here.
Councillor Lowe. Here. Conseillère Plante.
Ici.
Councillor Troster. Vice Chair Bradley.
Here.
Chair Dudas.
Ici.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you very much, Eric. We have no declarations of interest unless someone, no, we're good, seeing none. Can I have confirmation of the minutes from Tuesday, February 27th, 2024? Is this item carried?
Carried.
We have three inquiries. 4.1 is housing refugees and asylum seekers. And I understand that one is to be lifted onto the agenda.
Yes, please.
Okay. We have 4.2 alcohol in parks pilot project. And we have 4.3, which is update on the new municipal cultural plan. Did anyone else want to lift any of the other two to the agenda? And with the will of committee, can we lift the housing refugees and asylum seekers one? Okay. So we'll hold on to that. We'll come back to that item if that's okay. And we'll move to 5.1 Mooney's Bay Park Hill. Now we do have, I'm not sure if it's a full presentation from staff, but at least a little explanation as to what their thoughts are around this. We also have a technical motion that amends the report's recommendations, and I'd ask the vice chair to read that into the record.
Thank you, Chair. Whereas the recommendation 1 in the report titled Mooney's Bay Park Hill recommends up to $250,000 from citywide cash in lieu of parkland be allocated for external engineering and landscape architecture expertise for a feasibility analysis, site and design requirements, including costing for modifications to the hill and surrounding parkland. And whereas staff have indicated that a preliminary analysis of site challenges and potential concepts to modify the hill to allow reasonably safe sledding would be beneficial prior to undertaking any detailed designs and costing. And whereas this approach reduces the scope of the initial work, therefore be it resolved that recommendation 1 in the report be replaced with to approve up to $150,000 from citywide cash in lieu of parkland be allocated for external engineering and landscape architecture expertise for a feasibility analysis resulting in a potential safer sledding concept, including preliminary costing for modifications to the hill and surrounding parkland. And be it further resolved that recommendation 2 be amended to the following: that following the completion of the work outlined in recommendation 1, that staff report back to committee and council with the findings and recommendations for further action and funding if appropriate.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Now I'll ask staff to give their presentation, of which they believe they have a slide deck.
Bonjour, membres du comité. On est ici aujourd'hui pour vous parler de la colline du parc Mooney's Bay. Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. A short presentation on the Mooney's Bay Park Hill and the report that's before you, just to provide a bit of context, even though this matter has been discussed several times in the last year and certainly has gotten some media attention. We thought it might be good to go over some of the things that, can I have the next slide, please? Some of the things that are behind the report that you have before you today. So we'll touch on background on the current status of the hill, some of the site constraints that we're working with, and the assessments that we've done to date. Next slide, please. We are here today based on a motion that provided staff direction in December 2022 to go and have a look at the hill and see if we could come back with a solution to opening at least one side of the hill. The motion was specific to the north side, but we have over the intervening time looked at the hill in its entirety. The city does not have a program to rehabilitate or make safe hills that are identified as unsanctioned. Back in 2007, we worked with the city's insurance provider at the time to review all of our sledding hills, skateboard parks at the same time, to first of all, identify hills that were appropriate for sledding, but almost as importantly, identify hills that were not. In 2007, Mooney's Bay was approved. One side of the hill was approved for sledding, and that lasted until 2017 when we had another look based on injuries at the park. And so the city has somewhere in the area of 75 approved sledding hills, and probably close to 40 hills that we know people are sliding on that are not approved. And in those cases, we have put signs indicating that the site is not approved. Bylaw does some periodic visits to the site to identify any issues. And in some cases, we also put some protective hay bales, padding, those kinds of things. That was a recommendation that came from the coroner's review of the Mooney's Bay 2021 incident that said that the city should continue to make as safe as possible, even the hills that are not sanctioned. So we've continued to do that. As the report cites, there was a fatality in late December 2021 under very slippery, icy conditions. And regrettably resulted in the death of one child. But we also know part of the issue with Mooney's Bay and other sites is that they are open parks, and even though there are often accidents at these sites, there is no staff on site to properly record and document these. We have well documented or documented 9 incidents at Mooney's Bay. We anecdotally know of others, either people reporting to the Terry Fox Athletic Complex next to it, or through various other means of people reporting to us that they have been injured there. Next slide, please. The current status in 2021, following the incident, we did double our efforts to keep people off the hill, since it quite evidently has hazards. In the winters of 2022-23 and 23-24, we have fenced off the hill. Our observation in 2021, even after the accident, is that people were still, despite the signage, despite the large panels, lit up panels at the roadway, people were still accessing the hill, were still sliding on the hill. And what we have observed in the last 2 winters is that the fencing has been effective in keeping people off of the hill. Over the last year, we have done several analysis of both the work that was done following the incident by an outside consultant that was hired to review the hill, but also bringing together various expertise within the city to look at the site. Our conclusion is that this is a very steep hill, and that some of the operational and program-related measures that we've contemplated in the past, extra signage, extra direction, is not effective at keeping people safe at that site. The hill is a very peculiar one. It has a slope 360 degrees around the hill. The hill is man-made and was built in the early 70s as a junior ski hill. The anticipation was that there would be downhill skiing there, and for a while there was. But this predated the construction of the Terry Fox Athletic Complex north of the facility, as well as the maturing of trees in the park, the installation of parking and a variety of other things that have surrounded the hill now, with things that in the initial concept were not there. And so the challenge that we have now is that we have a very steep hill with no obvious solution to us to date. And what we believe is that in order to give good consideration to a possible solution, that outside expertise is required. We've identified that, as I noted before. This is not a usual practice to try to fix a hill, if you will. But we do recognize that Mooney's Bay is a very popular site, that there is community pressure to see if we can bring something back. The prevailing solution that has been suggested to us is that we adopt a position of allowing sledding from halfway up the hill, thus reducing perhaps the speed and the slope. What we've observed is that on that hill, halfway up the hill, is very steep, and that to send someone up to the midpoint or another selected point without providing an appropriate level area to properly get into a sled and properly aim yourself and direct downwards, what we tend to observe is that people climb to the midway point, dive on head first, and go any which way direction that they can. And that is not safe. And it would be problematic in terms of trying to get people to sled in only one area. So there are really four things that we're looking to accomplish if this moves forward. One is to find whether there is a safe area of the hill to sled, and what modifications would be required. The other is obviously to find an effective way to prevent people from sliding on the other slopes of the hill. What we've observed when the hill was still operational is that even though there are better areas than others, Mooney's Bay on a Saturday afternoon can become very busy. And when the main sledding area gets too busy, people tend to improvise and go off into other directions. And as I said, they have a 360-degree option at this site, some of them much more dangerous than others. The other thing we need to look at is that Mooney's Bay Park has had, since the Terry Fox Athletic Facility was open, a very robust cross-country ski center. It was for a long time, before urban ski trails became popular in Orleans and Britannia and Kitchissippi. It was for a long time one of the few choices for an urban ski experience, with a 5-kilometer run, a ski center where you can wax your skis, washrooms, etc. That brings in quite a few people, both in terms of trail users who buy either seasonal memberships or drop-ins, as well as a very active ski school that people register for ski lessons and attend there. Part of the issue is that all of the main part of the park where the hill discharges its sledders is really the area where we have conflict between skiers and more recently, fat bikers and just walkers. And so how do we address a safe runoff for sledding without it becoming a threat for people who use the park for other reasons? The other somewhat related aspect to this is that the hill has become very popular for non-winter activities. And being next to the Terry Fox Athletic Complex, it has become part of planning cross-country running events, for hosting sports events that include the hill, as well as simply using it for mountain biking and running up boot camps, that kind of thing. So part of the challenge, because people have said, well, just plant a lot of bushes and trees on the sides that you don't want. That would perhaps work for winter, but it would really impede the other 9 months of the year when having an open hill is of significant benefit. Next slide, please. This slide was really intended to show you the constraints that we're working against, what the elements are on each side of the hill, and the challenge of finding a safe side of the hill with a safe runoff area. The other note here is that the hill, when it was built in the 70s, was built with contaminated soil. So the soil that's under there is encapsulated. There has been a study that says it is not leaching, that it is safe where it is. So any plans that would come forward would try to avoid essentially opening up the hill to expose contamination. Next slide, please. I think I've already spoken to most of this. There's been several assessments over the years that have generally concluded that within normal resources and ability to control what goes on there, there's not been a level of comfort that we can open the hill and keep people safe. So we really are down to a decision on whether we want to explore and spend some funds to go a step further and look at modifications to the site. And what this report brings forward is that it is beyond existing resources at the city or expertise, and that what we really need to do is bring in some engineering and landscaping expertise to assist us and determine whether there is a possible solution, and if so, what that might look like. There is a technical motion, as Chair identified earlier. The original idea in writing the report was that we would ask up to 250,000, not really knowing. This is breaking new ground a little bit in terms of we have never looked at doing this kind of thing. The initial idea was to not only develop a concept, but to develop the technical drawings that might be required and a very accurate costing of what it might cost. In reviewing this, I think there is the opportunity to just take the first step, which is to see if outside expertise can find a concept that works for us and a general idea of what it would look like and what it would cost, and take that information and bring it back to you so that you can decide then whether it's an acceptable idea and whether the costs are reasonable in terms of next steps, which would be then developing a detailed design and an implementation. So I'll stop there, Chair. I think that's a quick overview of this site.
Thank you very much. We'll go to questions to staff. Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to the staff. A lot of work over the past 7 years with multiple assessments. I have a number of questions. Is this on NCC land or City of Ottawa land? And what's
Chair, this is on NCC land. It's on a long-term lease that expires in 2044.
Okay, so have there been any discussions with the NCC on this particular property and their interests in the land and seeing what would happen with that sledding hill?
We have not discussed specifically this project with them. There is ongoing discussions. When we built the 2017 park, for example, we sought their permission. Any work that we do in the future would require NCC approval, likely through a federal land use agreement that we would enter into with them. What we know is that the NCC for all its parks, this is true for Mooney's Bay, but it's also true for many of the other properties we lease from the NCC, the Rideau Canoe Club, some of the prominent properties that we have, is that they see the tenant as being responsible for these kinds of improvements to the land. And pretty consistently, they have told us that they would entertain changes to the property, but it would be at our costs.
Okay, thank you for that. When I look at the proposal for this study, it strikes me that regardless of the outcome of the study and the recommendations, that any alternative to any proposal to modify the hill would be exceptionally expensive. I mean, I see, because we're modifying an existing hill, we would need to comply with the AODA. An accessible path, even for a small hill, could run up, you know, I know I looked at one for a tiny path in my park, and I think it was $80,000. That was via the school board. What would you guesstimate? Like, what are we paying for accessible paths on a hilly site these days? Do you have any idea of the scope of that cost?
I'll let Kevin field that one.
Thank you, Chair. This would be a very difficult site to even contemplate from an accessibility perspective. This is one where perhaps we would actually go and discuss with the Accessibility Advisory Committee regarding this perhaps being an exception, because the requirement to make it accessible, we would be looking at switchbacks. We would be looking at or alternative means, like, for instance, some sort of lift mechanism, because the slope is too steep for meeting the 5% grade requirements of the accessible routes. Your park, for instance, required some routing to take advantage, but it was a much smaller application than we're talking about here. And I think in this case, the incline of that slope and the height of that slope is just too much to meet an accessibility requirement.
Yeah, that really struck me as it is a requirement if we upgrade it that they do comply with the AODA, and it would be a tremendous investment in order to get it up there, to get it up to that code. So along with the fact that, you know, the contaminated soils, you know, a lot of money on the design, I think the outcome is going to be extremely expensive for the city. Do you know any design consultants or any firms that actually have done this work? Has there been work like this done across Canada that you're aware of?
Chair, we don't know of any specific instances. We do have standing offers for these types of firms. Whether we can get somebody to take on this project, we don't know. It's not a common, as I said before, this is a very unusual to try to modify this kind of hill for this kind of application. And so it would be speculation to say anything about how well versed a company might be in this or how much it might cost.
Okay, thank you. Two quick questions with respect to winter tobogganing. How long is the season? I haven't tobogganed in a few years myself. Typically in the last couple of years, how long has the tobogganing season been? And I was just trying to brainstorm in my head nearby tobogganing hills. I don't know how far Carlington Park, Riverside Park, Uplands, Riverside Park, Arboretum. Do we know how many tobogganing facilities are close by Mooney's Bay, like within a couple kilometers that are sort of city permissible hills?
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a name tag, but my name is Sue Chimera. I've spoken to several of you either through email or on the phone. Firstly, your first question with respect to the length of the season. Given the current climate situation, I'd say we're lucky if we get 8 weeks just with the typical weather. Snow isn't sufficient enough to open the hills. We need depth of snow for safeness. And then with respect to Carlington, which is what we consider a really robust thrill seeker hill, that's about 14 minutes from Mooney's, 7.9 kilometers. I believe that was the question you had asked.
Yeah, is that the closest facility? I'm just trying to think because
Sorry, closest facility that we equate to that same type of hill in terms of thrill seeker. There are 3. I'll just have to, do you have your notes in there that had the other?
it's okay. I can look at a map too. Okay, not a big deal. Just, I have two last questions. Do we monitor, other than bylaw coming in, how else do we monitor hills? And with like the increasing liability, we're not the only city discussing this. I mean, Toronto recently had a very interesting discussion. Hamilton's had these hills banned for years. In Edmonton, they've also had the same discussion. Has there ever been any discussion about monitoring hills or having a more active city presence with tobogganing if the season's, staffing, to handle these questions of liability?
Creation team does have a risk plan in place where the hills are inspected twice a year. So pre-season, they are, each hill is inspected in person by city staff for changes in landscape, verification that appropriate signage is in place, and other safety measures. So that's done pre-season, again at the end of the season. And staff are doing ongoing site visits weekly throughout the operating season. It's not daily. Dan mentioned the number of hills, and our seasonal recreation team consists of 5 full-time staff who also simultaneously are operating the city's outdoor rink program. So that is the level that we provide in terms of planned oversight. We also, where we have hills that are in close proximity to our community centers, our recreation centers, staff at those facilities advise us of any anomalies that need to be addressed, such as if moguls are being built or other dangerous observations. And then we work with our public works teams to send them out and address. But in terms of paid staff directly deployed at the hill on an ongoing basis, we don't have that in place.
Okay, thanks. And I'll just ask one more and then I'll get back online. So looking at this proposal to spend $250,000 for a design, and I understand Vice Chair Bradley has an amendment for it to be $150,000. Do staff recommend that we undertake this study? I know that you've done all this work, you're doing this under direction for a site that's open for approximately 8 weeks a year, that's had 5 assessment, that will have to deal with issues of contamination, accessibility, design, and we don't know of anyone doing this work. Like, what is your overall recommendation on this, if it's staff supported?
Chair, staff see this as the only way forward, if it's the will of council to reopen this hill, we did not feel that the upfront and the eventual cost that to do the things that are likely to be required, and we don't know what those are yet, so I can't define them precisely, but it will be a lot. And the value for money in terms of an 8-week season is difficult to rationalize. And that's why the direction to come back with a report is what has driven us to bring this forward. For all the other hills, what we would simply have done is close them and left them closed, which is what we've done with 35 other sites. This site has garnered more attention and a direction from council. So we're here today really because there's been an express will to find a solution. It's not a solution that we have a program to resolve. And so it's a bit out of the normal cycle. And that's why we think that, you know, a clear decision on whether to do this or not is warranted.
Okay, thank you. I'll go back on.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to give some history and context, if I may. And first of all, I do want to thank the Vice Chair for putting a motion on the table that the Chair, myself, and the General Manager worked on last week and support. And this is about refining the scope of work that was outlined in the staff report for a cheaper cost. And it will obviously come back to committee and council for any additional decisions going forward. We don't know if it's going to be exceptionally expensive, as Councillor Carr purports. We don't know that. You hire a professional consultant to give us some options. And one option that even our general manager provided in 2022 was to stop halfway up the north side facing hill. That is the least steep of the hill. When we're talking about the steep slopes, we're talking about the ones that face the river. And we're looking for solutions with the side of the hill that faces the Terry Fox Athletic Center. The staff slide that was titled background slide focused on the negative. It didn't give us any context about how many people visit this site. Wouldn't it be great to have the context of, well, how many people in total visit Mooney's Bay Hill in any given year? How many thousands of people actually toboggan and toboggan safely in any given year? You are shown injuries, 9 injuries in 7 years. That's basically 1 injury a year that's being reported to the city. How many people are injured per day on the Rideau Canal? Every single day I'm on the Rideau Canal, I see people lying on the ground, being assessed by the first aid folks that are there, first-time skaters. There are injuries associated with winter activities, let alone any other activity. And so my argument is this is such a well-visited large city park. It's a 4-season park. It was built by humans for winter activities. This hill was built for winter activities. That was the purpose of building this hill. And we have allowed tobogganing to take place here for 50 years. So why would we not say, well, maybe we should invest some time and money on trying to make this city asset safer? I don't know what the outcomes are. I don't support spending $10 million or millions and millions of dollars at this site, but I do think we have an obligation to put the time in, look for professional help and come up with suggestions and then make the decision. So don't say no today. Allow us to have that opportunity to review the site. And I've got to say that the reference to the hill being slippery and that there were ice conditions present as a reason for the fatality in 2021 is not a genuine statement. Jose died because 3 posts were left at the base of the toboggan hill. Those posts were not removed as part of the pre-winter inspection of the park, where all the other recycling and waste facility or centers were removed. Those posts were left. And that's what she struck when she came down the hill in 2021 on December 27th, 2021. As the media reports show, that hill was covered in snow in December. So I think we publicly need to acknowledge this in memory of Jose, whose family have said to me more than once that they want to see this hill remain open for people to use. So I fully acknowledge, Madam Chair, and that tobogganing has inherent risks, that the river facing side of this hill is very steep, and that is not the side of the hill that I support to see open. I do think that we need to focus on the north facing side that faces Terry Fox. And part of that is, well, how do you restrict the public from the other sides of the hill? As the general manager has acknowledged, that is one of our challenges, is even if you open one section of the hill and we make it safer for tobogganing, how do you then restrict the public from the other sides, which I think is a very fair comment as well. So again, I have a lot to say on this, but basically, in essence, this is a public facility. We've allowed tobogganing for quite some time. I acknowledge that injuries have happened here over the years. And before a final decision is made, potentially of closing this hill for good in the winter, I think we need to do what we can to see if there's any other way to make it safer and come back to this committee and council for a final decision. So if it's financially not palatable, if committee members have concerns, they will have that opportunity to make a final decision. And that's why I think the technical motion that we have before us is the right way forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Plant.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente. Monsieur Chenier, est-ce que, en voyant la présentation, c'est très bien rodé, vous avez fait beaucoup d'analyses et c'est bien. Je voulais savoir, dans des situations, tu sais, dans mon quartier, il y avait Tyson qui est mort d'une fusillade en 2021 sur un terrain de basket. Récemment, il y avait quelqu'un qui a été poignardé devant une garderie où il y a beaucoup de subventions, de jeunes qui sont subventionnés par la Ville d'Ottawa. Est-ce qu'on fait ces sortes d'analyses ou ce sort de bilan quand les enfants sont, disons, menacés ou quand la sécurité des enfants est en question dans d'autres parties de la Ville?
Madame la Présidente, je peux simplement dire que dans les cas où il y a des incidents qui sont ou bien des blessures sérieuses ou des décès, quand ils ont lieu dans un parc, un centre communautaire, une installation, qui a une analyse approfondie de fait de ce qui s'est passé, comment éviter dans le futur. Je ne pourrais pas dire dans les cas où il y a une enquête policière, disons, parce que c'est un acte criminel. C'est en grande partie que la Ville, service des loisirs, prend deuxième place à l'enquête criminelle. Par exemple, au centre Michel Heights, au début de l'année, il y a eu une fusillade où l'enquête policière a été de l'avant, mais aussi en même temps, le personnel du centre et du service ont regardé aux instances qui ont amené à la situation, comment éviter, comment mieux réagir la prochaine fois, ainsi de suite.
Je peux faire un suivi? Oui. Est-ce qu'il y a la possibilité de faire un genre d'analyse pour les jeunes comme qui vivent dans un certain, disons, dans un contexte fragile où il y a peut-être beaucoup de criminalité dont vous l'avez décrit? Est-ce qu'il y a la possibilité de faire un genre d'analyse comme vous l'avez fait pour Mooney's Bay pour voir comment on peut améliorer le sort des enfants dans notre ville?
On s'est ouvert à regarder ce que vous avez en tête. Peut-être qu'on pourrait en discuter des paramètres de tout ça, comment on pourrait travailler ensemble. C'est bien.
Merci.
Merci, Councillor. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. So in the staff report that's provided, there's information about previous consultants that have sort of worked on the Hill, Mooney's Bay Hill, and as well, we're proposing to go with another sort of outside party to sort of provide a more technical look into what some of the possible solutions are. I'm curious what staff's gut feeling is about this? Like, what do you have a lot of expertise here. Like, what do you see as your ideal solution? All other things notwithstanding.
We have not, as staff, been able to identify an ideal solution that would be within the existing condition of the hill. We believe that in order to do this, we will have to get expertise, and that some modifications to the site are likely to be required. Councillor Brockington mentioned the north side of the slope, and that is worth looking at in terms of possibilities. We know that in the past, those that came before us and looked at this, and it's been going on a while, had looked at creating a berm at the bottom of that area to try to slow down tobogganers. It appears to have had, at least under some conditions, the wrong impact enacted to accelerate and launch them towards the Terry Fox fence. So we need to look at that, and perhaps a redesign of that berm is part of the solution, so it doesn't do that. Perhaps creating something else. Staff believe, and then to the question that was answered earlier, this is going over and above what we would generally do for these kinds of situations, where we would close the hill and say there are other alternatives. We're not a city without alternatives. There are some reasonably close by. Although acknowledging that Mooney's Bay has been a 5 to 9 kilometers, three hills within 5 to 9 kilometers. There are alternatives, although they are not the thrill that the Mooney's Bay Hill has provided in the past.
No, I agree. Lots of people from across the city go to Mooney's Bay Park because it's a particularly thrilling hill, and I can attest to some of that experience as well. So thank you for the report, and I guess depending on where this goes, looking forward to what that gives us.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Carr.
Yeah, just two quick questions. Is the fencing that was put up in 2022, is it removed during the summer so that people can go to their boot camp class or whatever else?
Chair, yes, the fencing that we put up is construction fencing. It is leased. We put it up in late November, and we take it down as soon as we can in the spring. This year, we tried to get it up down before the solar eclipse at the request of Councillor Brockington. We were able to open it up so people could go to the top of the hill. But yes, it is removed as early as possible.
Yeah, actually, I knew that because I just forgot. Went to go see the concerts at Dragon Boat Festival. But have we had any challenges with people breaching that fence at all and using the hill for sledding at all that we know of?
In the first year that we put it up, there were breaches. People tore down the fence. We were able to work with our colleagues in parks and with the contractor that provides the fencing to make it more robust, to make it harder to take down. In the last 2 years, there have not been instances of people tearing down the fence that I'm aware of. There are, and I was there, I think it was in February, to have a look, and it looked like there are two perimeters, one around somewhat down from the summit and then another one around the base. It looked like someone had breached the bottom perimeter and done some sliding off the side. But not to a great extent. It looks like, for the most part, it has been effective at keeping people off of the hill, and we're not aware of any significant breaches.
Okay, thanks. And just with respect to the AODA issue, Mr. Wary said this is a case where you would be seeking an exemption and you would go through the Accessibility Advisory Committee. Knowing that the cost of making that hill accessible would be extraordinary, would you be seeking that exemption before the request for this report is tendered or after you receive that report back?
Point of order, Madam Chair. We're not talking about how to modify the hill today. We're asking about whether or not we proceed with a study that's going to give us some recommendations. And my colleague is presupposing the outcome, calling this exceptionally expensive. We don't know. We don't know. So it biases the committee's outcome today on their judgment if we try and decide how much a modified hill is going to cost when we don't know. We're focusing on whether or not we proceed with a study that's going to give us recommendations and give us some advice on how to proceed, which may be expensive, which may not be expensive. We don't know.
Chair, I can just say from our experience with the advisory committee, we would only go to them when we had a specific solution to the hill and potential mitigating measures to address accessibility issues, which may not be, would likely require some concessions, may not be complete accessibility, but we would only do that down the road once we know that we're actually pursuing a solution that we want to implement.
Thank you, Dan, for jumping in, because I was just going to rule that I thought in terms of process and timelines that it was valid, although I do appreciate Councillor Brockington's comments that we are not discussing what type of changes we're going to be discussing to the hill. We don't know what the cost would be. So thank you for jumping in. I'm happy to continue the question. I think you had one more, or?
No, that's good. But just in my experience, it is important for me to know as the Accessibility Advisory Committee council liaison to understand when you're going to go to that group of people to ask about that question. And in my experience, these things are always expensive, but I take the point that this could be an exception, and it could be something that isn't expensive, but I have never seen that.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you. Just very briefly, Madam Chair, there's been some reference to some of the current users of the hill. We talk about track and field or cross-country skiers, boot camp, attending dragon boat concerts. These are all sort of middle class or upper middle class people who enjoy the hill. And then we talk about tobogganing, which is a free activity, which is a Canadian pastime. From the summit, take a look. There are 7 skyscrapers in the Hogsback area. You look to the east, there's the Springland skyscrapers. A lot of these people are new to Canada. They're not taking the bus with 4 kids to Carlington Hill. They're walking to Mooney's Bay, and many people drive who are coming from different parts of the city. They're not going to Carlington or the Arboretum or to Lansdowne because they can't get there, and they're not going to put kids with toboggans on the bus to get there. So I'm saying again, colleagues, you have this regional park that draws 500,000 visitors a year. We want it to be 4-season. The hill is a fantastic amenity. It was built for winter activities. We've used it for tobogganing for many years. And I'm just thinking, we're concerned about equity and fairness, and we want all residents to benefit. It can't just be for those who can afford to join a program. We have to also acknowledge that free activities benefit many of our residents, and this is one of them. So I just wanted to add that bit as well, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Vice Chair Bradley.
Thank you, Chair. I apologize if this was already said, but how much is it costing us currently now to fence off the hill annually?
The fence itself costs $7,500 per season to install. With the other measures that we still complete at Mooney's Bay, and that includes still putting hay bales along the north side fence where the Terry Fox complex is, trees, padding, and those kinds of things. It's about $19,000.
And what would a permanent closure cost?
If we were to continue to simply do this, then it would cost the cost of the fence, and we would continue to put the protective measures in place. That was the best practice recommended to us and supported by the coroner's office. So we are continuing to do that. There may be in the longer term other solutions to the site that could reduce that. But at this point, we haven't developed a go forward plan to, what we're doing now is is effective and appears to be getting the job done in terms of keeping the site safe.
Thank you. So it seems to me that we're spending $20,000 approximately annually for no additional benefit for our residents from a recreational perspective. And that's an ongoing cost forevermore, unless we come up with another solution, which we would likely need a study for, since we haven't identified a permanent closure, which might cost us $150,000 to find a solution for a permanent closure. So I think it's judicious upon us now to have a study to look at options to see if there's a way to keep it open, to have that value, as opposed to spend $20,000 annually in perpetuity to have no additional value for our residents. So I think it makes a lot of financial sense for us to move forward with the study today and hopefully find a solution in which we can keep it open. But if not, maybe it would give us some sense of how we would close it permanently safely too. So I think it makes sense for us to support this today. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I have a couple of questions myself. We have parks across the city. They have different designations. We've got parkettes and community parks and regional and district parks. What would you call this particular park? What's its designation?
We would classify this as a district park or a citywide park, simply because the amenities that are within the park attract people from broader afield than just the neighborhood. The most notable is, of course, the beach, which is one of only 4 beaches across the city. And so it is a drive-to location, as are things like the beach volleyball facilities and the Terry Fox Athletic Complex, which naturally draws people. It's the only one we have across the city. So citywide park.
Okay, so that would also imply that people are being drawn from across the city to attend this park for various reasons, not necessarily the hill, but for multiple purposes.
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned that the NCC lease lasts till 2046, I think it was?
2044.
2044. Do you have a sense of whether that would be potentially extended? Do they have plans to take it back from the city? I'm sure that that's far in the future, but does it look like we'll be in charge of this land for quite some time?
It does. They've never indicated that they wanted it back. And in fact, it's with all of our leases, they are all being reviewed with the NCC in terms of the future. But, every indication we have from the NCC is that they are happy having it as a leased property to the city.
Okay. So any investment we made would be ours for at least the duration of this lease and then into perpetuity, depending on the extension. I also had a question, and I never like asking questions unless I know the answer, but I don't know the answer to this one. I think you mentioned that you've previously, over the city's history, closed down 35 other tobogganing hills, sledding hills. My number could be off. Sorry, Sue, I'm putting you on the spot.
Chair, I guess the terminology, most of these hills are in open parks, so we haven't actually closed them in the sense of done anything to keep people away. What we've done is identify hills where kids have been observed sledding and where there is a hazard. The bottom of the hill empties out onto a street or into a steep ravine with water or those kinds of things. What we've done is identified those sites and posted signs saying that the sledding is not allowed. In some cases, kids continue to do it, and we do the best with bylaw and with our own staff to identify those sites. In some cases, we've added protective amenities, hay bales, padding, where there is an obvious collision hazard. But the site is still open and people can still access them. We just have identified them as areas where we know people are sledding on city land and the risk needs to be managed.
Were any of them district parks?
I'll turn to Sue for that.
Not that I'm aware of, but we can verify that.
I bring this up because, I'll be very frank. When I first saw this recommendation from staff and knowing the origins of it and that it was, brought forward from a direction from council, I had serious pause, right? This is the original $250,000 towards, recommendations that would cost more. I certainly, had a moment of sober second thought on that. But the thing is that we have district parks across our city. We have very large toboggan hills. I have one right in my backyard, so to speak, at Greens Creek. It's an amazing facility. It's not quite the same circumstances. But despite the signs, despite the hay bales at the bottom, people go off the back all the time. You couldn't have staff there monitoring it. You couldn't have that, but people around the city are drawn to it. And I know my family and others I know have gone to Mooney's Bay for that very same reason, to use the hill, to use the other amenities in addition to the hill, and to make it a day out. I'm very, very grateful for staff to come back with this. I know that you've been put in a very difficult position. It would be easier to just close this hill. And I wanted to thank the ward councillor as well as the vice chair for working with me to see if we can find something that's a little bit more palatable to my colleagues. And then if it rises to council, I still feel that it's worth giving it another shot and at least getting some recommendations to see if we can move forward. This gives us another gate to pass through before we make any more substantial funding requests. This also says up to $150,000, which I was much more comfortable with. And I'm very confident staff won't just go to that amount just because it says that. They'll find the best deal for us. But this is a very old hill that's been used for tobogganing and skiing and other purposes for a very long time. And for us to throw in the towel at this juncture didn't seem like it was the right time for me. And that was just my personal feelings. However, with the will of the committee, we'll see how this proceeds. And then if it rises to council, it might be adjusted as is. And then I don't see any other questions or any other comments on this. So I will call for a recorded vote on the technical amendment, which speaks to, if anybody wants to be read in again, it's pretty standard. It was the 150 as opposed to the 250.
Councillor Hill. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Councillor Plount.
Oui.
Councillor King.
Yes.
Councillor Troster. Councillor Carr.
Yes.
Councillor Brown.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Councillor Desroches. Councillor Lowe.
Yes.
Vice Chair Bradley.
Yes.
Chair Dudas.
Yes. Okay, and on the report as amended, is that item carried? Carried. Thank you, everyone. We'll now move on to, we held the inquiry, we lifted it onto the agenda. And Councillor, is it just that you have questions to staff? Okay. And we have Claire here in the room to answer. Councillor, please pose your questions.
Oui, je sais pas si je devrais regarder par ici ou là, mais anyway. Non, je voulais simplement savoir et merci beaucoup parce que évidemment, on a beaucoup de nouveaux arrivants qui arrivent dans la ville. Il faut solutionner un espace pour les accommoder, pour les accueillir, pour faire sûr qu'ils sont connectés avec des services. Et je voulais savoir s'il y avait un emplacement ou une propriété dans mon quartier qui avait été ciblé pour cet espace-là. Sentez-vous à l'aise de répondre en anglais, by the way, c'est pas...
Merci pour la question, Madame la Présidente. À propos de tous les locations qu'on a cherchées, je vais demander à Paul s'il est sur la ligne pour répondre à cette question, parce que je n'ai pas tous les renseignements. Paul?
Paul, est-ce que tu es ici? Je vois.
OK, donc, ça se peut qu'il n'est pas en ligne. Je vais répondre en anglais parce que c'est
Oui, oui. Non, non, ça va, c'est beau.
Ça va?
Oui, oui.
Okay. So I don't have a list right here in terms of every Ward 12 potential piece of land that we've searched. So I can certainly ask the team to get that back.
Okay. It was just about, was any Ward 12 property considered for this site? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I'll continue in English then if that's okay. Yeah, so and obviously we're seeing increases in our refugee claimants. This is an issue not just in Ottawa, but elsewhere. Was there any discussion with any of the big shelters, not just in Ward 12, but let's just narrow it down to say whether, you know, Shepherds of Good Hope, Salvation Army, Mission, about them sort of spearheading or being part of the new welcoming center?
Chair, we are working with several community partners as part of the process to not only identify land, but also to plan the model for the
Mhm.
Welcome Center. And before presenting that model to the federal government, we worked in particular with immigrant serving agencies and those who have expertise, because this new facility that we hope to put in place is specifically for newcomers and people who are potentially seeking asylum and newly arrived. And so it's important that we partner with those who have the expertise. So the partnership right now is focused with Matthew House for the particular Welcome Center proposal. With regard to all of the work that's being done to shelter in our community, we are always in contact with the 3 large men's shelters, as well as the women's shelter and other shelters as part of the complete system of sheltering. And so they are aware, they're part of solutioning with us, but in this case, we really felt it was important to bring the expertise to this particular service that we're planning.
Wonderful. And when you talk about a newcomer reception center model, does that sort of mean so someone arrives, there's things like a food bank, there's things like, you know, a thrift store where they can maybe get winter clothes if they don't have any. I see that often actually. So like, what does that model sort of look like? If I'm walking into it, what does it look like?
So at this point, we haven't defined all of the aspects of what the service and program would look like. The basic elements are immediate orientation to Ottawa and Canada, a welcoming and trauma-informed assessment of need, and a plan to connect to any kind of there's a case management wraparound, so a plan for them to actually receive or apply for the services that they need, in terms whether it be immigration-related services, settlement-related services, and/or counseling, trauma-informed services, et cetera. So typically when people come into a welcome center, after the initial welcome, there is a case plan an individualized case plan that's put in place for each family or individual, so that they can have a plan to work on the elements of arrival and settlement that will support them the best to move on to then more permanent and safe accommodations.
Great. And so when they arrive there, would they be just staying there, or it would be more of an assessment center at this point?
The proposed models, it contemplates a maximum of a 3-month stay. So it's very much
Okay.
a welcome, immediate settlement, wraparound case management, and links to other services.
And I understand you said you're working with Matthew House. We also have Cardi House in my ward, and I know they do wonderful work. But I wasn't aware that they do work with families. So, and I could be mistaken, by the way, but was there any talk about jumelé, putting this together with any of the new services that will be offered at the 333 Montreal Road Salvation Army Center or shelter that's opening?
So in terms of planning, we're very early in the process. We don't even know if we have federal government concurrence to move forward with this model. If we do receive that confirmation, we would bring our stakeholders, those who work in the settlement sector, together to help us plan out the model. So that will be one of the next concrete steps. In terms of the property on Montreal Road that the Salvation Army has purchased, we are not involved with the Salvation Army in that purchase process. They're an independent organization. They have a project in place. All the site plan approvals for that particular project have been completed. So that particular property on Montreal Road was not in consideration because it's not municipal land. It's not readily available. And our chief concern is to find land to advance the model as quickly as possible. So we're looking very much at municipal land that's available to us, and potentially federal land if it's offered at nominal cost.
But that site will eventually have services for families on it. They're saying there's going to be a food bank. They do have the thrift store. They're saying there will be amenities geared towards families. So potentially it could be either in combination or have some sort of refugee settlement aspect to it, correct?
Chair, respectfully, that would be a question for the Salvation Army.
Have you had any discussions with them about that or no?
Not specifically related to immigrants and refugees.
Would you be willing to have that conversation with them?
Councillor Plante, maybe that's best to take offline and chat with Clara about, just because we're talking about a third party who's also not here, who might say, yes, we want to talk, maybe we don't want to talk, so.
I've tried to have those conversations, so I'm not really sure where to go from here.
Okay. So Clara, maybe you can follow up with Councillor Plante before we leave this room today and just chat it out and figure out where to go from there next. Sound good?
Happy to do that. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Councillor, did you have any other question?
C'est beau, merci.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carr.
Hi, thanks. Wasn't intending to ask any questions on this, but since it was lifted, certainly as a city councillor that has two of the what were formerly known as physical distancing centers, there's close to 300 people, 300 new Canadians living in my two community centers. And I was wondering if there was any update on what that, if we figured out what the federal funding looks like from the announcements. I tried to look through the budget lines, but it's difficult to understand. Is there any update that can be provided?
Chair, we are in constant conversation with the staff at Immigrant, Refugee and Citizenship Canada. We do not have an immediate update from them. We have another call booked next week, or in the coming weeks anyway. In terms of the federal budget announcement, they did announce an extension of the IHAP program, which is the Interim Housing Assistance Program. And so we're eager to have that conversation with them to understand how that money could potentially flow to municipalities such as ours.
Thank you very much for that. Given that right now in our shelter systems, I think it's about over 70% of our families are new Canadians and close to 50% of the singles are new Canadians. Do we have any idea of, and so a lot of our response right now is to that crisis. It's been brought about as a result of global migration. Do we have any projections in your discussions with the federal government on whether those numbers will continue to increase at that rate, or are we expecting any decrease?
Chair, it's hard for us to project. We, in conversations with IRCC, have been told that they are very interested in having conversations about permanent solutions. So that tells me that they are hearing us when we say that we require, as municipalities, permanent infrastructure to properly welcome and support people who are arriving outside of the regular immigration pathways. So we continue to ask those questions. We do not have any data from the federal government, but I would safely say that this is now a reality for municipalities across the world.
Yes, thank you very much. And I do appreciate the efforts that have been made by the city in order to make sure that everybody has a place to stay when they arrive. And look forward to hearing about the permanent solutions because certainly community centers are not suitable, but thanks for all your work.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor.
Yeah, no, I did want to add, and I didn't get to in my question, sorry. I do want to thank Clara and her staff for just the endless work that has to go on this file. It's just like, there's no way of just shutting the tap off. And at this point, we've all accepted the tap is turned on permanently. Might be hot, might be cold, we don't know. So just wanted to give a shout out to Clara and her staff. I know it's been relentless. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is this item received? Received. 6.1, status update, community services inquiries and motions for the period ending April 12, 2024. There's no motions on this, no presentation. Is this item received?
Received.
We have no in-camera items. We do have one item that was previously distributed, response to direction to staff on strategic plan to reduce intimate partner violence. There is no vote to be taken on this. Is this item received? We have no notices of motion unless I stand corrected. Seeing none. And we have no inquiries. Seeing it, no, we don't have to carry it, Councillor Lowe. We're good. We have no other business. Motion to adjourn. Next meeting is Tuesday, May 28th. Is this item carried? We adjourned? Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you.